Traffic is starting to be a problem in 1960s Altengrad. The city is larger and larger with more and more vehicles on the roads, so traffic engineers needed to do something about it and increase the capacity of some main connections throughout the city. Welcome everyone back to Altengrad City in City Skylines. Today's episode is about cars and roads. We will go to one of the most important roads in the whole city, which is the bridge over the Monastery Island, creating a vital entrance into the main part of the city from the south. In the time-lapse, I will be increasing the capacity of the road and intersections, and we will also provide better tram stops around the area using custom networks made with the new Road Builder mod. But first, let's briefly talk about the history of cars in the Eastern Bloc in Central Europe. How could people buy them, what were some policies, and how many there were? After the Second World War, personal car was of course nothing new anymore. The populations were aware of them, maybe even drove them, but largely did not own them just yet. Situations in the Central European countries differed though. In pre-war Germany, for example, the regime promoted the use of personal vehicles and their ownership. The number of vehicles there tripled in the 1930s, but there were still relatively few cars, as they were very expensive. Nevertheless, the idea of owning a car was popularized. In the rest of the region, cars were also starting to become something common in the sense that people were used to seeing them. After the war and after the political transitions, the situation was a little chaotic, as the new communist regimes were maybe unsure how to approach the whole situation with people owning cars. There were various ideological as well as economic and societal arguments for and against cars. On one hand, car was seen as some individualistic or even capitalistic thing of the past going against the new socialist societies. But on the other hand, car ownership could have been also seen as a great socialist achievement for increasing the standard of living, for providing workers with more wealth. Economically, car manufacturing made sense as it could provide significant number of jobs and there were strong exporting opportunities, among other reasons. Different situation was with motorcycles. Shame that those are not present in city skylines. A motorcycle was very popular even before the war, and after the war, unlike the car, it remained as the accepted and even promoted mean of personal transportation. The fact that it was far cheaper to buy and run played a key role. But the popularity of motorcycles decreased with increasing car availability in the later decades, with some periods of renewed interest. Cargo vehicles were also different. Their production was prioritized before cars, as it was tied to the large investments into industry. It also tied to railway cargo transport, as the existing railways were already at peak capacity, so road cargo transport needed to step in. Apparently, in Czechoslovakia, the production of cargo vehicles saturated the demand by the late 1950s, which only illustrates how significantly higher this production was above personal cars, as at this time cars were largely unavailable still. During the late 1940s and early 50s, various policies were in place for nationalizing personal cars in favor of services requiring road vehicles. Manufacturing new cars was not a priority, and their yearly productions were very low and prices very, very high. The nationalized industry needed time to settle after the forced reorganizations of existing companies and factories. New companies were established as well, but all of this took some time. The start of the Cold War and tensions in the international politics also influenced car production. Certain international business ties were severed, and central planners did not want to shift resources away from production of military or cargo vehicles in case of another war. But it was clear that demand for cars was there in the population, and ignoring it forever would not do the regimes any favors. So, starting from the middle of 1950s, depending on the country, car policies loosened and car ownership was even promoted. Various car manufacturers in the region started producing new models and significantly increased the yearly productions. Buying a car in the late 1950s and the whole 1960s was not easy. It was still very expensive and the production could not keep up with the demand. Let's look at an example of car prices in Czechoslovakia in 1967. And to put things into perspective, the average salary was around 1,500 Czechoslovak crowns monthly at the time. Official prices were one thing, but then there is the reality of availability, or rather unavailability. And this is where things get really complicated. A potential buyer could get a car the official way. That means signing up for the waiting list by paying upfront the whole cost or a larger part, depending on the country and policy at the time. And then waiting. Sometimes very, very long time. Some sources say up to 10 years. I even found that someone waited 18 years in East Germany for the famous Trabant 601. Even entering the list was, in the earlier times, only allowed to people who had an official approval, with the idea that basically good workers will get the privilege of buying a car. The waiting time was affected by many things. Apparently certain regions or cities had priority, like Berlin in East Germany. Workers in some companies were prioritized before others. Jumping up in the waiting lists was officially possible for certain working achievements, exceeding the working plan, and so on. But there was also corruption, the unofficial ways to jump up for people with close ties to the people in charge, various party members, officials, and generally people who were more equal than others. The second option was to buy the car used. Here you could get it almost immediately, as you were presented with the actual existing vehicle, because there was a seller for it. But there was a catch. Used cars were more expensive than new, sometimes even by 100%. Why? Well, exactly because you could just drive away with it after you paid for it, and because the prices on the used market were set by the market principles. Although in certain countries and certain time periods, the states regulated the used market prices, and people could face serious jail time if they were caught selling a car above the fixed price of new, the charges being speculation or undermining the state economy. Some sources say that people simply signed a deal stating much lower price than what was actually paid. So overall, this process was borderline black market. But there were also official used car dealers where people also had to enter a waiting list. But overall, the used market was very, very small in the 1960s, since there were not that many old cars, because there were just not that many cars anyway. This gradually changed as the larger productions started to age in the coming decades. Some vehicle types or models did not have a waiting list at all, for example various foreign brands, but also some domestic production. These cars usually arrived to the market, to the dealers, in waves, in very limited numbers, in case of some foreign cars, just a couple of tens, and it was a matter of first come, first serve. This process was very corrupt, as whoever had ties with the officials bringing in the shipments had priority. It was common even for ordinary people to bribe the salespeople at the state dealerships to unofficially reserve a car for them in the next shipment. When the next shipment arrived, even if you instantly asked for a car, you could have been told that all the cars are already, quotation marks, gone. We can also notice that prices of some of the foreign cars were not really that astronomical, relatively, indicating that they were probably quite available, supply and demand price action. But that is not true, as the prices were fixed by the state. So on one hand, sure, people could buy foreign cars, but not really, since only a handful were imported anyway. Certain vehicle models and types were also only reserved for Communist Party officials or the members of the government, even though the cars would be present in the official dealership catalogs. Certain companies had priority for buying cars, and they were also allowed to sell phased-out cars primarily to their employees. Car manufacturers were bound by the central plan, so they did not make cars based on the current market conditions, nor did they need to compete for their market position or set their own prices. Companies were also not entirely free to design and make new car models based on new technologies or trends. The plan was then slow to react to changes in demand, as the planners were working with certain inaccurate predictions of car ownership and technological development. The central plan also dictated the percentage of cars to be exported, not allowing the manufacturer to decide on their own, to, for example, satisfy the local markets first. And by the way, the whole exporting situation of not just cars is actually an interesting topic for the economy of Eastern Bloc countries, so we will probably deal with that in a future video. Anyway, The quality of manufactured cars is also a complicated topic. From experiences of numerous car owners, we can conclude that the car quality was a hit or miss, so the final quality control in factories was not great. We can find stories about cars that would not even start at the car dealership, break down after just a few kilometers, or excessively rust when new, and so on and so on. But we can also find owners who still drive their 50-year-old cars even today without any problems. Obviously, the cars with the worst quality are not here anymore, so making a conclusion out of what's still driving today is a bit unfair. Nevertheless, I did not find any clear statistic for quality problems. I don't suppose such accurate statistic can even exist, as many people also stated that they bought the car anyway, even if they noticed problems with it, since they were able to repair on their own or simply didn't care too much about the issues because they already waited maybe a decade for that car. So such cars would not appear in any records or statistics. But there are various old media with the quality issues described, so it clearly must have been a popular topic worthy of reporting, even in the controlled environment. Spare parts availability was a problem though. That is already described by the manufacturers, repair shops, and so on. Especially the foreign import cars had close to zero spare parts in the market, but even the domestic production cars faced shortages of parts for repair. Now, for the total number of vehicles and the traffic situation. Here I collected the number of personal cars in the Central European Eastern Bloc countries, and I also included the United States for comparison. Here is a better chart which shows the number of cars relative to the population. The US curve is inaccurate though, as it only shows the small personal cars without pickup trucks, but it's only a comparison illustrating the differences, so it doesn't matter that much. We can see that in 1960 there were only a handful of cars in the region. East Germany and Czechoslovakia saw a big car boom throughout the 60s, and by 1970 there were already a million cars in Czechoslovakia alone. The highest relative increase was in Hungary, where the car ownership quintupled between the 1960 and 1970, although the base was lower, so the absolute numbers were not very high still. Both Hungary and Poland saw their boom later in the 70s, but Poland remained lowest in car ownership until around 1995, when it exceeded Hungary and caught up in 2000 with Czechia and Slovakia. After the split, of course, but here calculated together. East Germany just flew away on this chart, as we can see, during the 1970s, and at the end of the 20th century, the relative car ownership was double that of the other former post-communist countries. East Germany here is of course calculated as just the region, as part of the unified Germany. So those were overall quite a lot of new cars now in the 1960s, and not just personal cars, but also trucks, and very heavy trucks too, for example transporting the prefabricated panels. So not only were the traffic engineers facing the need to increase volume capacity, but also load capacity and deal with repairs or strengthening of existing infrastructure. Now, since this video covered the general car ownership specifics, and I'm already at page 4 of this script, I don't want to jump into the effects of cars on cities and what kind of changes were made. The video can have a single title anyway. But I have, of course, many different places around the city where we need to fix traffic, add more lanes, because that is the best approach, I've heard. So when we do those, it will be a perfect time to continue talking about cars and also public transportation. But now, let's go into the time-lapse, because there are some significant changes happening to the places that we have seen before in the city. Alright, so we are reworking that main avenue that runs over the Monastery Island, over the bridge, and together with that also these intersections, this one in front of the exhibition center, and the other one, the first one in the time-lapse below that new skyscraper. And of course we are also reworking that tram stop on the Monastery Island itself. And I'm using custom networks made by the new Blank Roads Builder, or just Roads Builder these days, I think. So it's a mod that comes with its own app outside of the game, where you're just going to configure the new network that you would like to place. It's super easy, actually. And then you're just going to upload it into the game like this. It really takes just a few seconds. And, gonna do some tweaks like I'm doing, for example, over here, just deleting some of the features that I won't need, and then just save it and use it in the game. It's really, really easy. It kind of sounds a bit intimidating at first because you still need to go into the road editor and, do all these tweaks manually, basically. But it's really easy, actually. It's much quicker than back in the day when I was doing some kind of custom networks. I had to kind of stitch it from different networks and then pay attention to all the lanes and everything. But this app is just going to do it all for me. So that's really welcome. And these days, I'm probably, every time I'm going to do some kind of changes to infrastructure in Altengrad, I'm probably going to do it with customized networks, custom prepared for that special project. So that's exactly the situation for this place in Altengrad. So what am I building here? Well, I'm preparing these kinds of networks that will basically have the trams on one side, as you can see on the left, and the road completely separated on the right. And I'm preparing a couple of also like transition networks with like a turning lane, for example, for cars, and also this tram stop island through the middle, because there is a tram stop on the street where I'm going to be using these networks. I'm going to be using these networks, well, actually you will see that in the game, no point explaining that. Other networks that I prepared with this mod are some kind of like generic roads that I'm going to be using here and there. For example, a tram stop, which only has, the trams in the center, and then just a single lane for cars on the sides. Surprisingly, such a road doesn't exist in the workshop or in the game, so I had to prepare it. I'm going to be using it on the sides of the intersection, for example, right here, there, in front of that new modern building, and below that skyscraper on the other side, because before that, we had somewhat dangerous configuration of the tram stops, where obviously, when the tram stopped, the cars in the lane next to the stop had to stop as well because people were, boarding the tram in front of it. Such tram stops actually still exist in real life. They are, weird, but in some places they are kind of necessary because, you are limited by space, of course. But you might argue that you could simply ban cars, but that was not exactly done back in the day. Now, this is what I was talking about. This is that transition network there with that turning lane for cars going into this like a sub-intersection, because this entire bigger intersection in front of that exhibition center area right here is going to receive this bypass network for going straight parallel to the river, all right? It's not exactly the busiest path through the area, but is certainly going to alleviate some volume of traffic from that main intersection, and I don't need to do special phases for that for the custom traffic lights. So that's definitely going to help. And I was taking some inspiration from real life. There are a couple of intersections like this that I looked at. So it's looking reasonably realistic. This is that tram stop that I was also talking about on this particular street. Again, took some inspiration from real life, so it's not completely a random idea to just split the roads and trams like that. As you can see, I'm heavily using intersection marking tools as well, because this is just super easy these days to lay down these inserts below the tracks. Right now I'm just using these like concrete inserts below the tracks because they look very, very modern, much more modern than the cobblestone that I was using before, even though it's historically not super accurate, because these kinds of prefabricated panels for the trams started to appear in the 70s, but I don't really have something between the cobblestone, the very old looking cobblestone, and these concrete panels. So I was already using it in some previous projects, and it's okay, I suppose. I just don't have that many surfaces to choose from, and I'd rather use something a little bit more modern already. So we also need to do some kind of changes, of course, to, for example, the bridge itself that runs over the monastery island, because it needs to be a little bit wider. It received one more lane for cars, and that means that it's going to cut into the sidewalks. The sidewalks are already reasonably wide because I was kind of planning on doing these changes when I was first building the bridge. But still, the sidewalks would be very, very tiny, so I had to just slightly stretch the entire bridge, and now we are going to just use that 4 meter wide already the prepared network for these kinds of sidewalks with the very nice looking decorative stone texture. I think I was using exactly this sidewalk texture on or the same network actually on that new bridge in place of the old one that was damaged during the war. So overall, this is like a straightforward thing to do. Now, the bridge itself is going to remain exactly how it was. There are, again, a couple of examples from real life where this was done, so no problem with that. Then I'm just going to do some kind of changes to this support on the side. I'm going to make it wider to accommodate, of course, that new road going down below, and just to make the open space in front of that intersection a little bit bigger for the pedestrians, so they can just go into multiple directions. There is not going to be any crosswalk right at the bridge because it's kind of not needed, to be honest, and it's just going to help with the overall traffic as well. This intersection right now is quite big, but it's actually going to get even bigger in some future projects because, no spoilers, but I would like to do some changes to the trams and make them go actually straight through it as well. So right now it's only a three-way intersection, although it's made slightly more complicated because that one tram, of course, doesn't go into any of the roads but goes into that separate road in front of the exhibition center. So that makes it somewhat slightly more complicated with the phases, with the traffic light phases, but it's not a big deal because we actually don't have any lines that go from the exhibition center station in front of it parallel to the river, right? We don't have any of those. We only have them going all into the monastery island. So that makes things a lot easier. But right now, when I was doing the traffic light phases, I did not know that. I did not realize it. So I was also preparing some phases for that, and it made things kind of complicated. So eventually it got much simpler. So yes, these particular phases, that's something that we will be doing many more times in the city. We haven't done that in the 30s, 40s or something because we didn't really have that traffic in there, the volume that would justify doing these kinds of things. But right now, as you can see, this is absolutely necessary because we need to really accommodate all of these different paths, these trams, of course, and need to make sure that it's just going to look kind of satisfying, right, when the vehicles will be moving around. So, also need to do some kind of lights. Like I said in the previous project, I'm not really trying to do this so that I can show Altengrad during the night, but I'm mostly doing these just street lights to have some sort of a decoration even during the daylight, right? Because the poles, obviously they need to be around these places. The place obviously needs to be illuminated, and on the bridge they are going to form the poles for the cable holders. So, that's just going to be looking like much better. There's just going to be something on the bridge. It's not going to be completely flat. Now, by the way, in that road builder mod, I also prepared my own new wires for the trams. So right now I'm just going to be kind of reworking the wire situation as well in some of these different places, especially, if it's going to be like a rework of something existing, so that it's going to be like more unified in the city. Because when I started doing these custom intersections for trams, with the wider corners, I did not have any wires. I only had the train wires made by Ronix and Revo, I believe, and those were wider. And back in the day, we did not even have node controllers, so it was all looking slightly weird. But at least it was something. It was not like the vanilla wires that just go from the side to side of the intersections, which looks absolutely disgusting. So nowadays we finally do have the options to really make it look good, and you can really make it super realistic how it is in real life. I'm not really doing that, to be completely honest, because I would be doing some sort of like all kinds of different wires just stretched into the poles, and the poles would be holding multiple wires and just connecting, somewhere in the air, and lots of different connections. Because if you actually observe the wires in real life, they are super complicated on some sort of intersections. But to be completely honest, I'm not even super sure how they're done. And even if I knew it, I probably wouldn't do it because it really is super complicated. And at the end of the day, the wires are just some, decoration, just something to place there so it's there. But, it doesn't really make sense to just spend hours doing it. But anyway, these are the finished cinematics, and here I'm going to show you these kinds of like longer static shots of these three places that we have changed, because Honestly, I could watch this for hours, and I kind of did, to be completely honest, when I was setting up the phases for the intersections, making sure that it all works, because it really is satisfying. And this is something that I would like to do many more times in the city, because I just like watching traffic. I cannot really help it. I'm actually looking forward to doing some sort of bigger roads all around the city, of course, like around the edges, not just inside, so that we can really observe the traffic with all the modern, quotation marks, cars, and especially trams, and just things moving on the map in the game. That's just why I'm doing all of this. Anyway, so this is the Monastery Island, and as you can see, here we have the tram stops that are kind of like separate, right? On one side of that crosswalk area and on the other side. And this is something that I really wanted to do from like day one when I started downloading these custom networks. And finally, with the Road Builder mod, I can do that. I can finally prepare my custom networks that are centered along the tram tracks, but the road lanes are offset to accommodate the islands on one side, right? So we can have this like an offsetting road with the trams running mostly through the center. As you can see in the time-lapse, I was like playing a lot with the node controller there and just making sure that it kind of aligns nicely, because we also are limited by space on that Monastery Island. I really did not want to do anything to the buildings and anything to that planter in front of the war memorial. So I eventually managed, and we did manage to squeeze in all those networks. In this particular place, I also did some change there in the corner. I placed that modern building right there. To be honest, I did not really need it to do that, because there was that, older, like a school or something. I'm not exactly sure what it was. Doesn't matter in Altengrad what it was. But I did not like that building at all. It had like a weird texture of the roof when I zoomed out. I just really didn't like it, so I got rid of it and placed this modern building. I'm thinking it's probably a hotel in Altengrad. It was looking very plain, the building originally, or by default, so I also decided to put those like decorative tiles on the sides to just put some different color really on the walls to break the large white surfaces. And now it's just looking slightly better, and it actually does resemble some sort of a hotel, especially because of the place where it is, just overlooking that important intersection, so it's immediately visible to everyone around. And it's definitely something super modern in this particular place, so it's a nice contrast to the exhibition center as well. And it's not just the infrastructure that we are going to be reworking, but also some sort of structures. So in a way, this is actually a very welcome change, and I really do like it. It's not like the nicest building ever, by today's standards, I suppose, but this place, it actually somewhat weirdly fits. Yeah, that's probably what I'm trying to say. This is one of those streets that I reworked. As you can see, the capacity for both cars and trams dramatically increased because we split it like that. It kind of makes sense because on both ends of this street, the trams are turning to this side where they are in there. So they really don't need to cross the car lanes at all. And it really makes a lot of sense to do it like that. And this is the overall view of the whole area. So not really like a massive change when you look at the city from above, but from the traffic's point of view, it really is a significant upgrade. But of course, it's just this place, and traffic needs to be solved like all over the city, right? So we do have many more places where we need to do such changes. Anyway, that is going to be all for today in Altengrad. Next time, we are going to take a look at trains for a change and do something similar, but for trains, for railways. All right, we're going to build a new station and all these kinds of things. So, thank you guys for watching today's Altengrad. Hope you liked it. If you did, then please do all the algorithm things. And many thanks to all the channel supporters who decided to join the channel, become channel members, directly support what I do here. Thanks again, take care, and goodbye.